Good evening, everybody, and good morning to all those joining us globally. It is indeed a pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar. This is going to be an interesting session where we'll dive deep into the critical UNECE regulation, that is UNR 155, a regulation that's reshaping the automotive landscape. UNR 155 mandates the implementation of robust cybersecurity management systems built on the foundation of the ISO 21434 standard. Our expert speaker for today is Johnbasco. He is an ISO 21434 certified advisor and automotive cybersecurity architect. And he'll shed light on their importance and the urgent steps needed to safeguard your connected vehicle. I'm Nisha from the marketing team, and I'll be moderating this webinar. After Johnbasco's presentation, we will have a Q&A session. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in our meeting chat box, or you can directly interact with Johnbasco during the Q&A session. So without further delay, we can start. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Nisha. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, John, you are.
Great, thanks. Good morning, good evening to one and all present in this webinar. Thanks for joining this. And as Nisha introduced, my name is Johnbasco. I'm the Senior Cybersecurity Architect at Nest Digital, Bangalore. From an education perspective, I hold a master's degree in computer application and a master's degree in physics. I'm also a research scholar and I'm pursuing my PhD currently at quantum key distribution. So with this short introduction, let's straight away jump into the agenda of today's meeting. Okay, before the agenda, I would also like to have a few words about my organization, which is Nest Digital. Nest Digital has its headquarters based out of Cochin, Kerala, and it also has its presence in Bangalore. Apart from that, we are spread across 5 different countries with 60 plus clients, and we are 25 plus year old company. From a service perspective, we are spread across from cybersecurity to cloud services, consulting, GAS, and so on. And from the business perspective, we are mostly into automotive, BFSI, aerospace, industrial, and so on, and healthcare as well. So this is in short about Nest Digital. Let's get to the agenda of today's meeting. So you're all going to talk about UNR 155, which is a regulation, especially from an automotive perspective. And hence, from an agenda perspective, we wanted to talk first on why do we even talk of cybersecurity from a vehicle perspective? And let's get into what's the difference between a regulation and standard. That's one key difference that most of us need to know. And let's jump straight into UNR. And UNR has 2 parts to it. One is the CSMS and second is the type approval. Let's see what are the 2 parts that would help tier 1 or OEM company specifically to get compliant and certified from a ISO 21434 perspective. And finally, let's also see one of the key thing, which is TARA, right? So most of us keep hearing of TARA in the cybersecurity world, especially in the automotive cybersecurity world. Let's take a scenario to see how do we build TARA on it. Finally, we'll go to the critical dates. Is there any deadline that is as part of this UNR 155 and how Nest can help you achieve those compliance? And we'll end up this with a short question and answers as well. Okay, so why do we talk of vehicle cybersecurity? All these days, we have been talking of cybersecurity from an IT and a computer and a system perspective. And now there's a lot of focus on vehicle cybersecurity. And that's why we are discussing about the regulation 155 as well. So as you all know, vehicles these days are not just a mechanical vehicle. It just doesn't contain any automobile spare parts alone, right? These days, vehicle comprises of a lot of electronics components. There's a lot of communication systems. There's a lot of softwares involved. And once we say there is a software, of course, there are high possibilities that there can be malwares, there can be any security threat to it, and so on. So that's the need of cybersecurity in a vehicle. And when we all understand that there is a software in a vehicle, and we are getting towards the software defined vehicles as well, right? So we for sure need a cybersecurity in place, and everybody understands this need. But what is the guarantee that everybody ensures that there is sufficient measures that's taken to protect the customer and the software that's within the vehicle? And that's why, there is a regulation in place. There are standards and guidelines that helps the OEMs to achieve this compliance. And another, practical examples that we see is that, you all would have heard about the Jeep hacks everywhere in the YouTube, right? So not just that, the other, you know, samples that you see on the screen, like Volkswagen is being challenged, telling that any vehicle that's sold since 1995 can be hacked through a wireless mechanism. And it's not just Volkswagen, right? Any brand that you take, like Audi, BMW, Ford, all of this can get into hacking. Either it be a relay attack through a keyless fob hack, or whatever reason it is. End of the day, it is very evident that these electronic components can be hacked. And you would have noticed Elon Musk recently telling that there's no electronic device that cannot be hacked. And when you say vehicle, it is not just the vehicle ecosystem, right? It also is the backend system that's connected to these vehicles, that poses threat to the vehicle owner, to the customers, and so on. And as an example of that, BMW's recent sensitive information leakage, especially because of a backend system from Azure storage, right? There was some misconfiguration that led to exposing of sensitive information of customers, of BMW's customers. So these are certain things that drive especially the global organizations like UNECE to come up with a regulation. Probably in the next slide we'll talk why regulation and what is a governance and things like that. So as you all understand that there is a need for cybersecurity, unless it is being enforced by with the certain regulations, you know these are not going to come as a part of a practical implementation. And that's why there is a regulation in place. And who has put across this regulation? It is through UNECE. Probably in the next slide we'll talk of what the UNECE is, but now let's try to understand what's the core with which this UNR 155 is in place. To give us a little background, it all started with WP29, which is actually a regulatory framework, right? It comprises of a framework for that actually governs a whole lot of regulations in place. It is not just UNR 155, which we are going to talk today. There is a regulation called UNR 156, which specifically talks of secure software upgrades. So are these regulations just about the cybersecurity? No, there are regulations even for safety as well. For example, UNR 152 is a regulation that speaks specifically about safety. I hope you all would have now understood what a regulation is, which basically mandates the need for implementation, right? Every UNR has its own reason of what to implement. And 155 states CSMS has to be implemented. What is CSMS? We'll of course see it in the upcoming slides, which is Cybersecurity Management System. But since I talked about cybersecurity safety, let's also briefly understand what safety is. I think without safety, there is no cybersecurity, and without cybersecurity, there is no safety. Because most of the requirements that we get these days from the customers are tied up between safety and cybersecurity. Nisha, can you zoom the safety part of the slide here? Thank you. So I'll just take 1 minute trying to explain what a difference between a safety and a cybersecurity is. There's a vehicle you see, and on the left hand side you see a hacker, and on the right hand side you see a common man walking on the street, right? Of course both are humans. So on the left hand side, when a human, when an intruder, when an adversary, when a hacker causes a challenge to the technical system and the environment, that is a cybersecurity, right? So when a hacker causes a damage to the technical system, that's called a cybersecurity issue. On the other hand, just because there is an issue in the technical system, which may have caused by a human or by the machine itself, any challenge that happens to the human, like for example, a malfunctioning of a braking system that can go and hit a person on the road, causing a safety issue to the person. That's a safety issue, right? So in both the places you see human, one place human attacking a system, and the second place you see a system attacking a human, which is a safety issue. So both of these are interlinked, and that's the reason why I wanted to take a minute to talk about both of this. Thanks. Let's go back to the original mode. Yeah. All right. So that's a regulation, right? Regulation means mandating. So now I'm starting a company of my own. I'm going to become a vehicle manufacturer. And there is a regulation that I have to abide, which is UNR 155. Okay. This regulation says I should have a CSMS in place. Now, as a vehicle manufacturer, is there any guidelines for me on how to implement the CSMS? Or is there any kind of uh, standard that helps me build the CSMS? So those are called the ISO 21434 and so on, right? So this is the key difference between ISO 21434 and this is the way they are related, right? ISO 21434 is a set of guidelines you could see, or set of rules or set of standards. So when you follow that, you will be able to implement a successful CSMS and then become compliant to this particular regulation, UNR 155. So very similar to this relationship between UNR 155 and 21434. I was talking of the other UNR as well, right? UNR 156, which is for cybersecurity, especially for secure upgrades, firmware upgrades, and any software upgrades. For UNR 156, there is a separate standard. It's called ISO 24089. And in case of safety, which is UNR 152, we have a separate ISO for it, which is ISO 26262. So this should have brought you a clarity of what a regulation and a standard is and the relationship between both of it. So let's move on to the next slide where we talk in brief about this organization UNECE, which stands for United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. So they are the one who actually brought in this regulation, and it has been widely accepted by at 54 different countries. So on the map below, you see countries that are marked in green. So all of those countries have agreed to this particular, have signed up basically with the UNECE, and they are agreed to be compliant with this regulation 155. So does that mean that the other countries which are not marked in green are open and they are not mandated from these regulations? There is an indirect way of saying that they still need to be compliant in some way or the other, which we will see. They may not be legally binded, but eventually as they are providing service to the OEMs and the tier ones who are spread across the different regions, across the green areas, there is a need that the other countries also have to keep the UNR 155 in their mind as they develop it. All right, let's get on to the next one. Cool. So now we are jumping straight into UNR 155. So as I said earlier, UNR 155 is a regulation which mandates two things. Okay. What are those two things? In order to get a UNR 155, you should have two things in place. One is a CSMS approval certificate, and the second part is a vehicle type approval, right? So these are the two parts. You'll have to remember this very clearly. UNR 155 certificate, if you have to be compliant, then you'll have to have a valid CSMS in place and get a certificate for it. And second is you should have a vehicle type approval. Great. So now, does this apply to every vehicle in these areas? No, it only applies to certain specific vehicles that are categorized as M, N, and O. So what is common between these vehicles, right? The only thing is, these vehicles have some of the electronic components and the communication channels that we were talking earlier. Probably at least one of the electronic component, which may be as simple as an ECU, right? So these are the categories of vehicle that has to be certified under the UNR 155 regulation. And who all need to be compliant? Because in the automotive industry, we know the vehicle manufacturers are OEMs, right? There may be tier 1 companies, there may be tier 2 companies who may be suppliers and vendors who are providing service to the OEMs. So is all of them mandated to be compliant with this regulation? The answer is no. It is the OEM who has to be mandated, who has to compulsorily be regulated for this 155. So then how about tier 1s and tier 2s? Tier 1s and tier 2s are still obliged to be compliant with this particular standard because it is the tier 1s and the tier 2s who develop components, who develop systems for these OEMs. And how are they required to be compliant? It is not that UNR 155 is going to regulate them and mandate them. Instead, the OEMs are going to have certain contractual obligations with them, telling that you must have to take care of certain cybersecurity measures as you develop these components and systems for us. Okay, so as I said earlier, now we are going to deep dive into these two parts. As I said, it's a CSMS and a vehicle type approval. So now let's imagine from an OEM perspective, an OEM has to get the CSMS approval in place. So what are the things they have to do? The first thing is the CSMS approval, right? And who can help getting these certificates, right?
This is a
So
time check. Sorry to interrupt.
Thanks,
This is a time check. We are 15 minutes into the presentation. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So who can help here? So can Nest Digital, I'm representing Nest Digital, can we be a certifying authority? No, we cannot. What can we do? I'll probably cover that at the end, but the certifying bodies are specific to different regions. Like TUSID is a company, who are widely accepted across different European nations, Germany, France, and so on, who can provide these certificates for the OEMs. And at Asia, for Japan, South Korea, there are different vendors who can provide. And you can see their names as well there. DECRA is one to name. Okay. So Nest Digital, I would also cover up lightly. We cannot help you directly certify it, but we can help you be ready for the audits and for the certification. Okay. And especially when coming to CSMS, let's talk specific to the CSMS part. So CSMS, as I said, the expansion is cybersecurity management system. So I'm an OEM, I'm a vehicle manufacturer, and now my company has to have a CSMS in place. So what does that mean? So it means that I need to ensure that I have a standard process, a cybersecurity process within my organization. So it's more specific to process. The CSMS is completely process oriented. Whereas the second one, that vehicle type approval, is kind of a technical part, right? So the CSMS part is more of a process oriented. And when I say process oriented, it expects me, the UNR 155 expects me to have cybersecurity process both at an organization level as well as at an individual project level, right? So if I'm a vehicle manufacturer and I'm going up with a new vehicle with a new vehicle type, I cannot jump away straight into the particular vehicle and then start building in a cybersecurity mechanism for that particular vehicle. No, that's not the process. That's not what the process says. Instead, there should be a organization level CSMS, which should basically indicate the cybersecurity culture of that organization. It should talk of the competence management in that organization, and it should ensure that there are proficient cybersecurity practitioners inside the organization. It should have a penetration tester, it should have a SOC manager, and everything. And it should have the required tools management in place, cybersecurity tools management in place. And what is the cybersecurity audit mechanism? Is there anything that's defined? So all of this is what defines an organization cybersecurity, right? And next, coming to a project level cybersecurity, it specifically talks of, okay, for this particular vehicle, my organization cybersecurity CSMS states that you should have this. I'm going to implement it. Apart from that, for this particular vehicle, I'm also going to have a cybersecurity plan. I'm going to have a cybersecurity assessment. I'm going to have a threat model for it. I'm going to perform a threat assessment for it, and all of those, right? And at this stage, you would be thinking, why is John talking of a lot of things, right? He's saying at an organization level, you need to do certain things. At a project level, you need to do certain things, right? As a vehicle manufacturer, how will I ensure that everything is in place? I don't want to go to an audit and keep failing, coming back and forth. So again, the answer is ISO 21434 is the guidelines for you. And within ISO 21434, where exactly do you look? That's where the clauses come into picture. When we talk of ISO 21434, this is an important area, clauses, right? People say refer to clause 7, refer to clause 5, 6, clause 15, and so on. So that terminology is kind of very scary. So what I've done is, I've prepared a next slide where I have listed down all the clauses. So for the sake of easiness, I'm only going to pick up from clause 5 to clause 15. These are the clauses that's available. So let's go through those, so that would help you understand and it would help you make it easy to implement a CSMS. Of course, whatever on the box, on the table that you see on the screen, those are clause 5 and clause 6 work products. And when I say work products, so every clause has a requirement, well-defined requirement for cybersecurity. It defines very clearly. And I am an vehicle manufacturer. I may give some of the component and the system development to a tier 1 and a tier 2 company. So when I distribute these activities, as a owner of the vehicle, right, as a vehicle manufacturer, what are the things that I should ensure? If I ask a tier 1 company to develop a component, then I should give them a requirement telling that, hey, at your tier 1 organization, who is the named cybersecurity head who can guide me? So such requirements are defined. Can you go back to the previous slide, please? Yeah. So exactly, that's what you see here. So there are specific requirements for every clause. And when you implement those requirements, you have to provide sufficient evidence. Those evidences are called work products or WP. So you see a couple of work products here on the screen for clause 5 and clause 6. So when you open up a ISO 21434 document, you would see requirements, you would see work products for each of these clauses. Again, what is clause 5, clause 6? At a very high level, I would say clause 5 gives you all the requirements for an organization level cybersecurity. And clause 6 gives you all the requirements required for a project level cybersecurity. It's not just the requirements again, it indicates the requirements, the work products, and everything end to end. Next slide, please. Okay, so the clauses. This is the slide that I was talking about. I would take 5 minutes to explain you all the clauses. The reason why this is very important is this is the actual guidelines that's going to help you and expedite you to get this CSMS certificate. One thing that I forgot to tell you is, as I said, there are two parts. One is the first part is the CSMS certificate, and the second part is the vehicle type approval. You will not be able to get a type approval without having a valid CSMS certificate at the first place. The first things first thing you have to get your CSMS certificate. And these are the clauses that's going to help you. I'm not going to repeat clause 5 and 6 because those are specific to organization and project level, which we just discussed. Clause 7, which is a very critical thing because, as I said, it's a distributed cybersecurity activity. It's not a vehicle manufacturer is going to manufacture a vehicle end to end. They're not going to own the vehicle end to end. Of course, they will have dependencies with the tier 1s and the tier 2 organizations. So when they outsource, when they give a piece of work to the tier 1s and the tier 2s, it is the responsibility of the vehicle manufacturer to agree with the tier 1s and tier 2s, indicating the level of cybersecurity that is expected at the component level or at the system level. So that's what is the cybersecurity, the distributed cybersecurity activities, or clause 7. That's what the clause 7 states. So it talks of the supplier's capability, and when we get a RFQ, right? When a vehicle manufacturer sends out a RFQ to one of the tier 1 and the tier 2 companies, the RFQ itself will ask for certain cybersecurity specific questions. As I said earlier, give me who's the point of contact. They will ask for a named person. It is not that the tier 1 company can say that the cybersecurity architect or the manager will take care. No, it needs to have a name in place. So they go to that level of accuracy and ask certain questions. Uh, can you click here, please? I wanted to showcase. Yeah. So this is something called as a CAA, or the Cybersecurity Interface Agreement. So when an OEM have a tier 1 as a supplier, there will be a CAA agreement in place. So this is a kind of a contractual obligation, right? So CAA is not a, when I say contractual obligation, it doesn't really look like a contract, but at the end of the day, the CAA gets into the SOW, and you'll be contractually obliged to this particular requirement. CAA more or less looks like a RASI matrix. I'll probably show that in a while, but there will be a CAA agreement between the OEM and the tier 1, and if the tier 1 is having a tier 2 as a supplier, the tier 1 is still expected to have a CAA in place with the tier 2 and get into an agreement telling that as we develop this component, as we develop this software, as we develop the system in place, what are the things that you will have to keep me informed? What are the things where you will have to get my approval, where you have to consult with me, and things like that? Can you please click next? Uh, yeah, this is how a typical CAA agreement looks like. As I said earlier, this more or less looks like a RASI matrix, right? And it starts all the way from the concept phase all the way till your deployment phase. And concept, yeah, in the automotive, we all understand concept is something very similar to the design phase in the SDLC, right? In SDLC, we have design, development, testing, and deployment, right? So here we have concept, product development, verification, validation, and then deployment in automotive. So for each of the phases, right, you understand what's the work product. So in the concept phase, that's where we actually identify and define an item. So when you define an item, are you ensuring that you are letting me know that this is a new item that's being identified, and so on? And for each of the item, you define what is the level of confidentiality that is required, and so on. So probably it's not just the confidentiality. We work on a CAA triad here, trying to understand for each of the item what is the level of cybersecurity that you'll have to bring in, and also decide at this point of time whether that is really cybersecurity relevant or not. You don't want to take a product that is nowhere related to cybersecurity. You don't want to pick up a mechanical component and then there is no way that it is kind of associated with an electronic component or no software. Then you can term it as not relevant and you can excuse that off. So this is how a CAA agreement looks. And next, please. So that's what clause 7 indicates. Okay. Sorry, go back. So similarly, clause 9 through clause 14 talks of, various stages. It gives you various requirements. What are to be done at a concept phase. So one example at a concept phase is, you start identifying these items and so on. So you are expected to have architectural design in place at the concept level. So have you planned for your threat modeling? That's one of the question. Excuse me. So where is the threat modeling in place? So do you have the data flow diagram? Submit it as an evidence. Once the threat modeling, has done, give the evidence of the threat modeling. What are the threats that you have arrived out of that particular threat model? It is a work product. It is a evidence that you have to submit. So all that I was talking about is just the concept phase now. Similarly, when you go to development, is there, if you're developing in C, then it also goes all the way, whether there is a secure coding standards that you have followed in place. And what, have you followed ANSI C practice, or have you gone with CERT C or MISRA C? And of course there are recommendations provided to follow MISRA C, but it all depends again. So all of those have to be submitted as evidence. So similarly for validation, production, and maintenance as well. So you would also see at a decommissioning phase that probably may not be true as we uh, create a new vehicle, but as part of the plan, you should also have a plan for secure decommissioning. I'll come to that point in a while, but in validation is where we really think of different level of testing, right? Either your source code analysis or your penetration testing for that. So all of those are defined very clearly in the requirement. Have you considered this? And if yes, what are the findings and so on? So that's the level of evidence collection that happens. And these clauses helps you follow all those easily and then provide the evidences. And finally, the clause 15 talks of TARA. TARA's threat assessment process, where, of course, I have a separate slide for it, how to perform TARA and so on. But the clause 15 gives you a whole lot of requirements on what are the things that you have to consider as part of TARA. Threat analysis and risk assessment, right? So once you are able to understand all these requirements and then collect all the evidences, and you're 100% sure, and of course, Nest Digital as an organization, we can help you arrive at this stage. We can help you arrive at all these products, work products, and ensure that you all have a required documentations in place. Of course, training is one of the very key requirements. We can help you with all that. So once from a readiness perspective, we can help you get to there. But end of it, it would be through some of the organizations that we discussed earlier that you'll have to submit all these evidences. And once you're able to clear the audit, then any organization or the OEMs or the vehicle manufacturers who are able to clear those with sufficient evidence will be given a valid CSMS certificate for a period of 3 years. That's the validity for 3 years.
This is
After
a
that,
time check.
you may want it to renew. Yeah,
We are
thanks,
30
Nisha.
minutes into the presentation.
Great. I think we covered the first part of it, which is the CSMS approval. So this is how you get a CSMS, valid CSMS certificate. Great. So at the end of this, I'm assuming that we have applied, we have received a CSMS certificate. So now with this certificate, I can move on to the second part or the final part of the UNR 155, which is a vehicle type approval. So I am taking this certificate and applying for a vehicle type approval. And what are the other evidences? The other evidences would look similar to what we just talked, but the evidences would be specific to the vehicle type. So whatever evidences that we submitted there, has that been followed for this particular vehicle type? So you may want to repeat some of the documentations in that area, but it would be specific to a vehicle type. And again, it starts all the way from your design to manufacturing and things like that. Apart from those, what specifically does this audit looks at? It specifically looks at testing and validation and risk assessment, right? And this is where again TARA comes into picture specifically for this vehicle. So it is not sufficient that you provide all of those evidences, but apart from that, you'll also have to provide a risk assessment specific to this vehicle type, of course, with all of the items that you have defined and you have understood, and along with the testing and validation. This doesn't mean to say that I perform a risk assessment and there are 150 risks that were identified and I need to mitigate all the 150 risks in order to proceed with this type approval. No. It is okay to have residual risk in place as long as you are able to justify telling that this is not going to cause any cybersecurity issue to the system, to the vehicle. So once you apply for this, you'll be able to successfully demonstrate the technical evidences of this particular vehicle type, and then you will be given a vehicle type approval for this particular vehicle type. So this is a kind of not a very complex process, but the part one is, and once you do that properly, then here it's matter of doing some additional delta parts to it and then getting the vehicle type approval. Great. Let's move on. Next slide. Great. So we are another 20 minutes or so. I wanted to take this time to talk about Tara because just the way the clauses were of a magical word that people were talking, what clause is it and things like that. Tara is another area where it was a gray area where not many were having a confidence on how to do it and so on. Tara is more of a threat assessment, I would say. And very similar to this, we did something in the design phase as well, or the concept phase, which is threat modeling. Of course, when you do a threat modeling, you get a whole lot of threats identified at the end of threat modeling. Here, what we do is we take those threats, right, and then try to assess them and see what are the risks associated with those threats. So you should have a connectivity definitely between the output of your threat modeling and Tara, but UNR 155 doesn't say that you have to draw lines between those. But it would be a good comparison for us to have both of these asserts and then try to do a comparison so that we don't miss anything. There are a lot of tools that's available in the market to perform threat modeling, whereas for Tara, it's mostly a manual process so far. But at Nest Digital, we were able to build in an automated process. It's a tool that's available. The reason why we felt there is a tool that is required is many a times you'll have to go pick up an item, do some analysis, which we will talk in a while. And every time you'll have to go back to the ISO document and keep referring for those values. And we felt that's a bit of a complex task. And hence we are able to automate it in the tool. And once you're able to dictate, say that this is the level of risk that's involved, it would automatically pick up a value from the document. Of course, we build small macros and codes into it. So that should do the job for you and that should save the time as well. So let's take this example and understand what Tara is, right? This Tara, my friend, the reason why I gave this title is, I had a friend called Tara. So I wanted to see, is this Tara as well a real friend for us? And the answer is really yes. This helps us really mitigate the threats and you'll be able to arrive at mitigation for all the risks that you're associating with a particular threat. So this example, if you see, this is an automotive headlamp system, right? This is assume that the OEM has given this task to a tier 1 company, and the tier 1 company is working on this headlamp system. This is the same example that's in fact given in the ISO document as well. So just picked up the same. So the headlamp system, it is the headlamp system is connected to the body control unit, and it gives you a on and off and a high beam, low beam kind of a thing. And the control passes to a power switch actuator, which in turn gives instruction to the light, and a high beam or a low beam light is turned on, off, and so on. This is a mechanical process, right? So this is the item boundary that we are going to talk about, that we are going to consider. If you take just this one, this part of it, I don't see any cybersecurity risk associated with that, right? Because it's just the knob that you turn on, turn off, and the lights go on a high beam and a low beam. But this particular headlamp switch is connected through a body control unit, which is a ECU, right? And also in this diagram or in this system, you would see that there is a navigation ECU. This probably is an added functionality of the vehicle. This navigation ECU is connected through your cellular network or LTE, and it keeps identifying any vehicle that comes on your way. So you're probably turned on your high beam and you're driving on a highway, and this navigation ECU has detected that there is a vehicle that's coming in the opposite direction to you. So sometimes, many a times, we apply with sense, we turn the high beam to low beam and drive. But many a times we just drive with the high beam. So that causes a lot of inconvenience to the opposite side driver, and hence that poses a kind of a safety risk as well, right? So the feature that this particular vehicle has is that the navigation ECU is able to detect the oncoming vehicle, and it is able to give an instruction back to your body control unit, telling that there is a vehicle, and it automatically turns off the high beam and it goes to the low beam. After the vehicle passes, again it switches back to the high beam. So that's the kind of functionality that this particular vehicle has. So now let's try to do a threat assessment for it. And one assumption that we have here is, of course, we think of all the threat that is possible for this particular lighting system. One assumption is that this entire case is kept inside a tamper-proof, so we don't have to waste our time thinking of physical tampering and things like that. Let's think more from the other perspective. Okay, the first step is you need to identify a damage scenario, and of course, don't worry about it. This will be helped by some organization like Nest Digital who can partner with you as you try to get this certificate for CSMS. Not necessarily that you should break your heads trying to understand in depth of it. We can work together and collaborate and help you arrive at this. So as part of Tara, we identify the asserts. That's the very first item. Of course, here we have the items as headlamp switch is one of the item, but headlamp switch is more of a mechanical item, right? So am I going to consider this as relevant? I will not sometimes, right? Because it's a mechanical thing. It has got nothing to do with cybersecurity. I can skip this off. The headlamp switch is, in fact, as we saw in the other diagram, is connected to a body control unit, which is an ECU. So now there is a question, right? This is an electronic component which has some basic softwares in it. And can I keep it irrelevant of cybersecurity? The answer is no. It is definitely relevant. And hence, I'll have to do a CAA triad to understand what kind of breach can it pose. Would it be more from a confidentiality, integrity, availability? You'll have to do this exercise, repeat this exercise for every item, every relevant item, and you'll have to do it for every CAA triad. Check from a confidentiality perspective. If yes, take it through. If from integrity, take it through. From availability, I'm going to focus on one thing, which is availability, because this is an electronic component, and if a hacker is able to flash this ECU with their own code, with the malicious code, and that can make the body control unit malfunction, right? And when the body control unit malfunctions, there are potential chances that when a vehicle comes from the opposite side, it can turn on to high beam, causing the other person to have a distraction, and it can end up with some safety issue, right? So these are the possible things. So I'm trying to understand and understand the damage scenario and try to work out on it. So this particular damage scenario that I was mentioning now, and firmware upgrade that is malicious in nature, that is, you understand what's this impact rating for it, right? It is of course going to be severe. It's not medium or low. It is of course a high severity item. And how is it related? It is related to safety, right? So it is a safety related issue, and it is severe in nature. So that's the damage scenario. Once you identify the damage scenario, again you'll have to pick up for each of the identified damage scenario, you'll have to start working on performing the attack path analysis. So how do you work on an attack path analysis? So pick up that and have a separate table. Again, what is the assert, which is a body control unit, and what is the threat, which is basically an insecure firmware upgrade. What is attack path analysis? So attack path analysis may happen all the way from the navigation ECU that you saw at the top, right? The navigation ECU may be compromised, not necessarily the body control unit. The navigation ECU, which is connecting through a cellular network, may have got compromised, and with which a malicious flashing can happen to the body control unit, And as a result of that, the lamp may not work as intended, right? So these are the various attack path analysis. So when you have an attack path analysis, there are other parameters that you need to calculate. How do you do that? Of course, as I said, 21434 gives you a guidelines of how to do that. But this diagram, the table below, have showed you how I was able to calculate that, the feasibility rating. Can you press next, please? See, this is a reference again from 21434. You know, the elapsed time for this particular attack path analysis, whatever we are just talking, is of course, we'll have to see how quickly this has to be mitigated. Can you allow it to be there as a residual risk and then have this particular risk for a longer time? No, it has to be done immediate. What is immediate? Should be less than a day, right? So elapsed time is less than a day. And what level of knowledge is required in order to fix it? Can a automotive engineer just fix it? Can an embedded engineer just fix it? Or a cybersecurity automotive embedded cybersecurity engineer can fix it? Of course, it needs a expert level in order to come and fix it, right? So the answer is expert. And does everybody knows this? Is this available something on the internet? You go to ChatGPT, you go to Google, and do you get the answer with which you can fix it? Not necessarily, right? This firmware may be confidential. It may be specific to that particular ECU of that particular vehicle manufacturer. So it's confidential. And similarly, what's the window of opportunity if you keep this threat open? It is unlimited. Any number of unlimited hacking can happen there once a wrong firmware is flashed. That's unlimited. And do they need any specialized equipment in order to do that? They can just do it with a laptop with a code that they want to flash. It can be a standard. Now for each of it, there are values that you can see it in the above reference table. For less than 1 day, the value is 0 and so on. So the next line at the bottom table have mapped all of those numbers there. So how did ISO 21434 arrive at these numbers? Probably that's a lengthy discussion. You'll have to attain, you have to basically, participate in the 5-day session on how 21434 works. There probably, you will get an idea of how these numbers arrived. But for now, at the interest of the time, understand that these values were picked up from these tables, and a Nest Digital's tool will be able to automate all of this process immediately, right? So the numbers were picked up straight from there. For expert, it has picked up 6, as you see here. It's 6, and similarly for confidential, it is number 7. All of those numbers are picked up and put on the bottom table. And then the sum of all these numbers were made, which brings to the total of 13, right? So what is 13? 13 is the attack feasible rating number. All right, click next, please. Right. So now we have 13. That is right. So now next we are going to understand what is, there's just 2 more steps that's pending. Okay, please be patient enough to understand. I know it's a lengthy process, but still I'm taking time to explain this so that it kind of helps everyone. So next, the last but one step is the risk value determination. After that, we'll go straight away get into the risk treatment decision. But before that, how do you arrive at a risk value determination? Again, this table, right? You know what's the set, you know what is the identified threat, which is the insecure firmware upgrade, and what is the impact rating. We saw that it is severe, right? And it is a safety issue. That's severe and safety. The next, these 2 values, right? The last 2 columns, attack feasibility rating, we have mentioned 13 high. How did the high come? Because you referred to another table, the attack feasibility rating table given by ISO 21434. There you see it's 13. 13 falls under the second range, 10 to 13, which means the rating is high. So I picked it up, so 13 high. And then what's the risk value? So we have another table that's a matrix between the feasibility rating and the impact rating. So we know it is severe, and this severity is the impact rating, and the attack feasibility is high here, right? So between severe and high, you see this number of 5. So we pick up 5 and put it here. So this is the final number that we arrive at, right, out of TARA for one particular item that we defined of and one particular threat scenario. Similarly, you will have to repeat this for all the items, for all the threat scenarios, and then arrive at a conclusive number. But for each of these risk values, right, you'll have to take a decision. Again, ISO 21434 gives you an indication. If it is number 5, can you leave it and go, accept it as a residual risk, or you will have to treat this particular risk? Next, can you please click next, please? And for 5, it means that it this risk has to be mitigated. If it was 4, 3, 2, and 1, you could still accept it as a residual risk and say that it can be worked in the upcoming release and so on. Since it's number 5, it says the risk value is S5. S5 means severity 5. So which means the risk treatment decision made here is to immediately mitigate this by adding the necessary modules related to secure firmware upgrade. You either probably check the integrity of your firmware. If that module doesn't exist, check for all of that and then go ahead with your secure firmware upgrade. So this is the risk treatment decision. I hope this was useful for everyone. So this is just one item definition, as I said. So this has to be repeated for every item in the vehicle or in the component or in the system. So this is a very detailed process. I just wanted to run through it as part of this session. I hope this would have been useful to you all. Great. Come to almost the end of the session. I wanted to talk of this key dates. Uh, I think most of us are aware of it, right? This has been the talk of the town for a while. ISO 21434 and UNR 155. It's been since 2022. Of course, it got signed in 21, but since 2022, everybody has been talking about it for new vehicle types and so on. But from next month, I think this is going to be mandated not just for the new vehicles, or not just for the new types, but for even for the new vehicles, which means UNECE is going to take stringent measures. If a vehicle manufacturer has to deploy, the OEM has to deploy any of the vehicles in those 54 countries, then this is mandated. And without the CSMS certificate and the vehicle type approval, they cannot hit the market. So that would be a huge financial hit for the OEMs. And eventually, that would trigger the tier 1 and the tier 2 companies as well to be ready to be compliant for this particular regulation. Great. So how can we help here? As I was talking through it, it's not just Tara. We can help with the compliance readiness. We can provide you the support. We can collaborate. We can provide trainings. We can work on threat modelings. We can help you understand the requirements that's dictated in each of the clauses. Work on the documentation. That's of key importance. Documentation is a painful step there. It's a pain in the neck because there's a whole lot of documentation that's in there for each of the clauses, and you'll have to attach the required evidence. So where there is shortage of cybersecurity resources, we could definitely partner, collaborate, and help building such requirements all the way from the concept phase to implementation and so on. Of course, vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, these are some areas where we can collaborate. Of course, final thing is on the SOC and the incident response. Most of the cybersecurity companies has this incident response and update management, but these are more specific to vehicle SOC, VSOC. So we could collaborate with our vendors and provide those support as well. Great. I think I've come almost to the end of the session, but just one thing that I wanted to talk about, as we were talking through this entire stuff, it's a secure SDLC that we are saying, right? Starting all the way from the requirements, concept, product development, V&V to production. And somewhere we also noticed decommissioning, right? So after July 2024, if you wanted to decommission, right, any new vehicle, if a OEM is introducing a new vehicle probably in August of 2024, then they will also have to submit a plan telling that 20 years from now, when they wanted to decommission this particular vehicle type, right, it is not taking the vehicle to a garage and saying that you can discard or you can break that into multiple pieces and then say this is not going to be used any further and decommission it. That's not going to be the process, because it's not just the mechanical components that you're going to decommission. Since there are electronic components, there may be customer data that's very much stored into those ECU components. So decommissioning itself is a bigger process. So you'll have to probably encrypt the data that's inside the electronic components, inside the storages, take backup of that, and then delete it. So these are some of the steps into the decommissioning plan as well. So we have to think from end to end, all the way from requirements design till decommissioning. And we are there to help you. So please feel free to reach out to us, reach out to our marketing department. We can help you there. Fantastic. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll open up for any Q&A.
Thank you, John. So I see one question in the chat box. John, would you like to answer that first?
Yeah, let me. Any change to type approved software? Do we need to get a type approval? If it is of major upgrade, yes, we need to get. Yes is the answer, Lenny.
Thank you, John. Thank you. I mean, do you have any category of what type of changes should go through a reapproval?
And all of that is being defined in clause 8, I believe.
Oh, okay.
So you should refer to the ISO document, which gives you a clear instruction of what and how to do that. It's one of the requirements, in fact. I don't exactly remember the number. It's 8.7 or something like that.
Okay, no worries. I'll refer clause 8. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Or if you want to write an email to us, please feel free to do that. I can provide you the reference.
Sure. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So, yes, Sudhendra, the second question, of course, as I was saying earlier, yeah, as a tier 2 companies, you are indirectly obliged to do that, because the OEMs, end of the day, when OEMs take their product for certification, they will very clearly have to say that component X, system Y, component Z were developed by a tier 1 X company, tier 2 Y company, and so on. And for each of those, there will be a contractual obligation. So you would have already signed an agreement basically with the OEM, and hence you are legally bounded. It's legally bounded in the sense what? Not specific to UNR 155, but for the contracts that you have signed with the OEM. The OEMs would ensure definitely that there is a contractual obligation. And it also talks more of the supply chain complaints as well, right? And from a legal perspective, so you'd be responsible and answering the same to OEM rather than to the regulation. Any other questions?
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. John.
Just to highlight one thing, all your mics have been enabled, so I request you all to unmute your mic and ask your question. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. John, I have a quick question.
Sure, please go ahead.
So you said from July 2024, this CSMS is this is a must for this automotive industry.
Sure.
Means it's followed in other nations, or it's applicable only to India? They are planning for this one.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question, Santasivan. As I was saying in one of the early slides, in India, it is still India has not signed the 1954. India is not part of that agreement, right? So that's why you see India not in green. So if you're a vehicle manufacturer based out of India, right? If you're an OEM based out of an Indian company, you still are not obliged to be compliant to this particular UNR 155. Whereas if you are a tier 1 and tier 2 company who's working for an OEM who's based out of those 54 countries, right? Those green shaded countries. It's mostly in the Europe, Australia, Japan, and so on. So then the OEMs will ensure that you have these valid CSMS in place.
Okay.
Yeah. So in
Yeah.
India, the answer is no. You don't have to be really complaint to that, but you should have the CSMS in place so that you get the required contracts from those OEMs. Otherwise, the OEMs will not be in a position to hand over those projects to you, either if you're from India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, anywhere.
Yeah, this is clear, John. Thank you.
Welcome. And in fact, Japan, they have adopted 155, but now they are in turn, I attended a recent webinar where I understood they are trying to promote an advanced version of UNR 155 that is specific to Japanese region. So
Okay.
that's evolving. Maybe India would also become compliant eventually, and other nations as well.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Please feel free to ask, type, or you can even you can write to our marketing department as well, and I will respond back to you with the specific answers. Thanks, Lenny. Yeah, Nisha.
I guess we don't have any more questions. So I think we can wrap up the Q&A session. But if any of you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to us at connect.nestdigital@nestgroup.net. It will be put in our meeting chat box over here. So let me conclude this webinar. Thank you, John, for your informative session and for sharing such valuable insights on the importance of these critical automotive cybersecurity standards. Truly was informative. Let me also extend our gratitude to everyone who joined us today. I think your participation made this a success. We look forward to having you for our next webinar as well. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.